Welcome to the Power Brain, Power Life. I'm Matthew Newell. We know that our brains are the most complex items in the entire universe. I love to talk to people who know more about that than I do, to figure out what the latest insights are with our brains and neuroscience, and also how we can help leverage that in our daily lives. So I am thrilled today because we have the senior editor at The Week and the author of The Performance Cortex, how neuroscience is redefining athletic genius. Please welcome Zach Schonbrun. Zach, great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Got the book right here. So many amazing stories and insights throughout it. I'm curious from your perspective, one, kind of what attracted you to the topic, and then two, as you were going through so much research, so many relationships developed. What were some of the headlines for you?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of certainly a lot of headlines. So I don't know if we have enough time today to even to get into all that, the things that I learned. But I think the simple explanation for how I landed upon this subject was just reading about these two neuroscientists at Columbia University that were working with the baseball team at Columbia, using their background in neuroscience and trying to understand, what it was that made a great hitter. What was the decision making that went into, their decisions to swing or not swing at a pitch, and kind of looking at their work from trying to tackle baseball from a neuroscience perspective. I was a sports writer, and I was certainly familiar with sports psychology and kind of the mental aspects of sports. That had been something that a lot of teams were increasingly interested in, over the past few years. But neuroscience seemed to be kind of it was kind of the logical next step in that sports science evolution. But no one had really written about it, that much. And these two guys at Columbia were really kind of pushing the ball forward, really using everything that they had in their laboratories to understand this very fundamental aspect of baseball. In hitting, it's the hitting comes down to a decision whether or not to swing or not swing at a pitch. And so they were putting baseball players into their lab equipment and trying to understand what parts of the brain were activating and responsible for that decision. So that was kind of my entry point into wanting to know more about this general subject, in the brain and sports. And so I ended up writing a story for SBNation.com, the website, about the two guys, Jason Sherwin and Jordan Maraskin, and they were starting a company called the Servo. So I wrote about them for this magazine style piece. And when I got done with that, I really felt like I was done with the subject. I really wanted to know more about ways that neuroscientists were, not just trying to understand sports, because I think there's still a long way to go before we really get to too many great answers about or definitive answers about athletics, but really just understanding the basics of human movement and coordination and skill. And so I started talking to more neuroscientists and visiting laboratories that were, in this motor research, motor control, motor learning pursuits. And, I wanted to keep Jason and Jordan had started working with Major League Baseball teams. So I kept in touch with them, and I wanted to kind of, as I wrote the book, I wanted to kind of keep this narrative going with them, because not only was it illustrative with what they were finding, working with professional baseball players, but it was also, I felt, helpful kind of seeing the hurdles and the roadblocks that they were facing, trying to gain some traction in professional sports. So I kept up with them, and they granted me great access with the teams that they were working with So they kind of became the narrative thread of this whole book. And along the way as well, yeah, I visited with neuroscientists again, trying to understand, how we move, and the way that the brain, the role that the brain plays in our skilled movement. And it was a way to kind of gain appreciation, and give a sense of appreciation to other readers, to other people, about how big a role the brain plays in skill, and particularly in sports, because I don't think it gets what it deserves. The justice that it deserves. Certainly, as as a sports fan myself growing up, and as a sports writer, we tend to focus on the muscles and the the size and the strengths of these athletes, and their speed. But there's a lot more to what makes them great, than some of those things that we can measure. And so getting to the point where we can measure the cognitive abilities that these men and women have, I think will until we get to that point, it's going to be hard to fully appreciate the cognitive aspects of performance.
Well, and I love one. I mean, there are so many great things about your book. One of the things that I loved throughout was there's this wonderful juxtaposition of you have these visual images of LeBron holding up a trophy or Serena holding up a trophy, but most of your stories come from hotel conference rooms and just very stale atmospheres where they're doing all this research. One of the things that you highlight, and I'm curious of your opinion. It's generally thought that hitting a baseball in professional baseball is the single hardest sport maneuver of all the major sports. Did your findings, in your opinion, kind of bear that out? And if so, why is it so tough?
I think it's kind of a subjective question. I think if you ask any baseball player that, they will say, of course, absolutely, yeah. There's nothing harder to do in all of sports. But I'm guessing if you ask like a hockey goaltender, they probably might differ, or Tom Brady might have a different answer to that. But listen, hitting a baseball, yeah, it's an extremely difficult thing. I mean, you're talking, it takes about 400 milliseconds for the ball to reach home plate from out of a pitcher's hands. And that's 0.4 of a second. But that's not even accounting for the length of a pitcher's stride, or the deceptive maneuvers that he might make in holding the ball behind his glove for longer. And it also doesn't account for the fact that about half that time is just taken up by the brain signaling directing the signal from the brain to the muscles to swing, or, in certain cases not to swing, right? So the actual motor command from the brain to your body takes about half that time. So it really leaves these guys with 0.2 of a second in order to make that decision, which is amazing. Considering that they also have to factor in the types of pitches that they're going to face, the pressure of the situation, and so on. So, yeah, it's an amazingly difficult thing. I think it probably explains why there's only been, there hasn't been anybody to bat over 400 since Ted Williams. It's amazing that these guys are able to hit the ball at all. But I think what we've learned, or what scientists have learned more and more about hitting is that a lot. It's not about reaction time. I mean, we like to think that these guys have, they have great vision, which is mostly true, but pretty much every hitter has this kind of the same ability vision wise. I mean, vision doesn't really vary that much from hitter to hitter, and it's not necessarily about reaction time either. I don't think reaction time really varies that much between someone like a Mike Trout and someone off the street. Reaction time is kind of there's only there's not a huge gradient in terms of strictly reaction time. So what are hitters doing? What are they relying on? They're relying a lot on prediction based on the amount of experience that they have in hitting hitting baseball, for years and years. I mean, they're able to pick up cues from the pitcher that you or I are not able to pick up. And these are, incredibly subtle, frankly, perhaps indecipherable cues, but it's built up over time, in their experience, that they know that their brains know exactly what to look for, and what sort of giveaways are going to tell them in those 2/10 of a second, whether or not that's a slider that they want to hit, or it's a curveball that they're going to lay off of. And I think the best example, best real world example that we have about how important those cues are is, you might remember, about 15 years ago, 20 years ago now, there was a celebrity softball game with Barry Bonds and Albert Pujols and some of the top sluggers in Major League Baseball, and they were asked to face off against Jenny Finch, the Olympic softball coach. And she was she was a hard thrower, certainly. She threw, I think, her pitches came in around 90, low 90s, 95 miles an hour. Certainly hard, but not anything that these sluggers were not used to. But they got up to the plate and they couldn't touch what she was offering. Some of them couldn't even get the bat up their shoulders. And the reason is that she was throwing underhand, and they were so used to reading the pitch out of a pitcher's hand from overhand that they couldn't even see the ball coming out of her hand from below. And so, that was a great illustration of just, what it is, what the experience has had trained in these guys, in their brains, to be able to hit a baseball. And that was one clue into what makes them so great.
So that actually brings me to a part of the book that I kind of found as a surprise. It seems like that the 10,000 hours theory that, first was posited, a decade ago, it seems like your research and the research, of the neuroscientists that you work with actually support that. And that's a really good example, because these people had 10,000 plus hours of overhand pitches with traditional baseball, but underhand pitches, which seemingly on paper wouldn't be that much different, they couldn't move. So just specifically from that 10,000 hours perspective, what's going on there that is so useful to how our brains work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the brain needs to be trained and gain experience in whatever specific task it's asked to perform. And I think that's the real key in understanding kind of the brain's, where the role the brain plays in this 10,000 hour rules. It has to be a very, a very specific correlation to what it's, that softball example is a great example. I mean, the brain isn't just picking up, 10,000 hours isn't just being able to teach the brain to pick up a ball from 60 feet away. It's training the brain to pick up that specific, angle of the pitch coming toward it, and that's what those hours of practice and batting practice and experience is honing for these great athletes. And as soon as something throws that off, from a different angle, you almost have to relearn what you're doing. But that experience is crucial. And it lends itself to being able to to pick up these again these very subtle cues that allows players to make predictions, and that goes in a long way into what these men or women are doing. You know, there's also something specific to kind of active expertise, which isn't really quite clear, but yet it seems to be a real factor in again what makes these great athletes so great. You know, there was a study that I wrote about in the book, and it's kind of a famous study at this point. This was about, you know, I think it was 2006 or 2007. There was a group in Italy that was looking at, you know, they took a group of professional European basketball players, and they wanted to show them a clip of a fellow player shooting a free throw. And they wanted the players to guess whether the ball went in or out, strictly by focusing the camera on the fingertips, on the player's fingertips, as the ball left his fingers. So this was, again, a prediction exercise, trying to understand what it was, what cues these guys were picking up from the flight of the ball as it left the player's hands, that could tell them whether or not it was going to go in or out. And it turned out that the players were very good at predicting that the ball was going to go in or whether it was going to be a miss. But what was interesting was how much better they were at making that prediction than even former players or coaches or sports writers that they also grouped in to try, and these non-players group. So the non-players, the non-active players, were not as good as the active players in making that prediction. So there's something about, active expertise being thrown into, whatever specific task you're doing currently now, that gives these guys certain insight and advantages. And even, as once you've left the game for a certain amount of time, you're not able to pick up on those same cues.
So, it was such a good study. Your book my copy of your book is full of earmarks and highlights, and that's one of them that I just couldn't get past. And I think, and I'm going by memory here, which is always scary, I think that the numbers ended up being that if you paused it the second the ball left the hand, the current players could roughly 66% of the time predict whether or not the ball was going in, and former players and coaches were like 23% less accurate than the active players. Just without, all you see is just it leaving the hand. It was such a good story. Well, you provided a great segue to basketball. One of the other great through lines in the book was one of the people you work with being just obsessed with obsessed probably isn't the right word, but Steph Curry came up a whole lot, and so many of the answers that this neuroscientist posited, the answer was always Steph Curry. So I'll kind of set it up, and then you walk it home. So you've got LeBron James, who on paper should absolutely be as dominant as he is. Then you've got Steph Curry, who is, I'm going to get some of this wrong, but 6'2" and 190 pounds, who on paper should be probably a fair player, but certainly not what he does. What did you find in this research on the difference between the two, or the similarities between the two?
No, I mean, I think the interest from the neuroscientist John Krakauer at Johns Hopkins, who you mentioned, it was really more curiosity and just endless fascination with a player like Steph Curry, because you're right. On paper, he would not jump out at anybody, and in fact, coming out of college, scouts were worried about his lack of foot speed, his lack of size. And his they didn't think he would be last long in the league, never mind become the league's best player. So Steph Curry kind of became this a great example to me of what I wanted to try and explain in the book, is just this appreciation for the more things in sports than just muscle size and quickness and athleticism, or athleticism as we think of it. You might say Steph is so good at what he does because he has a quick release on his shot. You might say that he's got good vision, that enables him to pinpoint, I guess, where the hoop is at all times or something like that. Although he a couple of years ago, even after he won MVP, he had his vision corrected, so it's probably not that. So there's a more to what he's doing, and more to what makes him great, right, than just his physical traits. Because you like I said, you wouldn't be able to pick him out of a lineup of 200 NBA players, if you were just looking at his physical attributes. So what is it? What is it that that makes him good at what he does? And I think, I would argue it's a combination of his decision making, his prediction, his coordination, his concept of knowing where players are on the court at all time, that make and able to make these passes that he can do, that wizardry that he can do, all while dribbling the ball. So there wasn't so much there aren't great answers to what make him good, but he became kind of a great illustration of, for me, what I was trying to pursue with this book, trying to understand, there are the things beyond what we can measure, that are what create great athletes. So I mean, the other great one that I like to use, and I used in the book, was the 2017 I think it was American League MVP race came down, in baseball, came down to two players who you could not, draw cartoonishly that could be any more different. You had Jose Altuve, who's 5'6", and 150 pounds or whatever. And then you had Aaron Judge of the Yankees, who's 6'7" and 275 pounds. And, so what makes them different. One's a slugger, one's a more of a slap hitter, although Altuve still hits home runs, but they were both incredible hitters. So what is it that makes them similar? That's what I think is the challenge for scouts. And if you're a scout, I don't even know how you tackle this after 2017, how you tackle your job. Are you just going out looking for everybody that looks like Aaron Judge? If that's the case, then you're going to miss every Jose Altuve. Vice versa. Aaron Judge is a little bit easier to pick out, but not everybody who's 6'7" can hit 45 home runs. So it's trying to figure out what it is beyond their physical abilities, what we can see. That's the hard part about scouting, and what I think we've missed as a sports industry for far too long.
Those are two terrific examples. One question before we kind of go to any applications for day-to-day life. One of the things, you're reading in your book all these amazing stories about all these athletes. Sometimes you go into rehabilitation instances that are just so inspiring, and just such a wonderful book, and how the brain inserts itself. But one of the things that really caught me is you put a good deal of copy to just the amazingness of the human hand. And one of the people you talk to describes it as the Swiss Army knife of the human body. That it's not even just a hand in general. We all know that that's a lot of what differentiates us from other animals. But even against our closest relatives, the monkeys and the chimpanzees, even the human hand specifically is superior to that, in that it can do anything from throwing something and catching something to helping eat. Did you have any interesting moments when you were learning? Like, it really takes all of I shouldn't say excitement, but it takes all of the mystery out of, like, we all have this human hand. Did you start looking at things differently because of that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I gained a huge appreciation of our ability, our sense of touch, which I think we tend to think of as being really separate and different from movement. And obviously it's two, different kind of portions of the brain that are involved, one, with movement versus sensation. But the relationship between the two was really striking to me, and I have a lot in the book, about that. But there's still a lot that we need to learn. I think was also interesting about our sense of touch, and how how good it is, and what it's capable of. And there's been some work on this in sports settings. There there was some research a few years ago about hand slapping and touching as a predictor of success in NBA teams. The teams that high five the most seem to have the most success, something like that. It sounded really silly at the time, but the more, you actually dig into again, this relationship between, between touch and, and sentiment and movement, there's, there might be something there. I mean, I think the best example of the ways that we don't often think about the role that touch plays in our movement, but yet it clearly does, is the whole Deflategate situation with Tom Brady.
Absolutely.
I don't want to bring this up now that he's Super Bowl. I don't mean to denigrate the GOAT, but if you really want to think about what exactly was going on there, I mean, Tom Brady was allegedly deflating the footballs in order to grip it better, right? And why? I mean, why would that be necessary in order for him to throw it? And so, but it clearly it was, and for whatever reason, that grip enabled him to perform better. And so I think that it kind of gets a little bit to this, this relationship, this understanding of why touch and why our hands in particular matter so much to our performance and our ability to move.
And as a tennis enthusiast, two of the examples that you used, also in the book, Rafael Nadal going through his, picking at everything and before every serve, and then Djokovic, not as colorful, but that very consistent 20 to 30 bounces of the ball. Again, you posit in the book that it's your touch signaling to your brain that a repeatable process is about to happen and you need to prepare for it. So such great examples. Well, Zach, before we wrap up, I want to thank you so much for your time. The book is tremendous. Having this Q&A with you is even better. Were there any, either post-book, anything that you look at the world a little differently, or that you would kind of suggest to other people, like, yeah, we're talking about the Serenas and Djokovic and Tom Brady's of the world, but just on a day-to-day basis, how can it affect your learnings? How can it affect people's day-to-day lives?
Well, I mean, for me, it just came down to appreciation of what, the brain's role, as I said, the brain's role in certainly everything we do, but most specifically in movement. I mean, I think there's been, kind of this long history of looking down on motor research, not really relating it to the cognitive, more the cognitive sciences and cognitive investigations. And that's wrong. I mean, it's as I argue in the book, I mean, I feel like, athleticism, being great at athletics, like some of these men and women are, is a form of genius. If you consider the decision making, the processing, the logic and the prediction that they have to do to perform their tasks at the highest level, which is what they're doing. Yeah, I mean, that's those are cognitive attributes that they are employing all the time, and so and that's a kind of a genius level of performance, to me. I mean, I think the appreciation, it comes down to, you want to look at where we are today in artificial intelligence and robotics and computerized thinking. I mean, we're quite advanced, right, in those types of pursuits. But building you can Google or go on YouTube and look at robots that are trying to open a door, and and some of the videos are hysterical. Or read about PhD programs that spend years trying to build a robot that can open up a bottle of water. And they achieve it, but it'll take another 5 years for them to build a robot that can put the bottle cap back on. And this is true. I mean, it goes to the heart of why our motor system is so complex, and why why we should think about, well, at least I think about this every time that I reach for a cup of coffee, or throw a ball in the backyard, with my son. What we're doing, what your body is doing, is a fairly intricate and complicated procedure. And so, watching LeBron James run down the court, throw behind the back pass, hopefully, after reading my book or hearing this interview, you'll gain a different kind of appreciation for that. But as far as day to day, helpfulness, I don't know. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of leave it at the appreciation side of things, and hopefully that'll be one step toward improvement.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you, Zach. Be sure everyone to check out his writing, and in the week. Definitely pick up the book. I loved it. I've read it more than once, and will probably read it again. If anything, just to highlight how far from being a genius in anything that I am. Thanks again for the time.
Thank you so much. This was great.